Ethan Caldwell leaned against the counter of the bustling coffee shop, adjusting his apron for the third time that morning. "I can't believe I'm doing this," he muttered under his breath as he handed a cappuccino to a customer. From the corner of his eye, he spotted his best friend, Matt, lounging at a corner table with a smug grin. Matt leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying Ethan's discomfort. "You're the only billionaire I know who'd willingly trade a penthouse for a barista job. How's the normal guy experiment going so far?" Ethan shot him a glare before returning his attention to the line of customers. "I told you, Matt. I'm tired of being seen as a walking bank account. Every woman I meet is more interested in my net worth than me. I need to know if someone can love me for who I actually am." He sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "This is the only way." Matt shook his head, chuckling. "You're insane. But hey, if you want to live off minimum wage and sling lattes all day, who am I to stop you?" The bell above the door jingled, and Ethan's sarcastic retort froze on his lips. A young woman rushed in, her cheeks flushed from the cold. She was juggling a tote bag, a stack of papers, and what looked like a half-eaten banana. Her auburn hair was pulled into a messy bun, a few loose strands framing her face. Sorry," she said breathlessly as she reached the counter, nearly dropping everything in her arms. "Let me get a— Oh no." In her haste, she knocked over her coffee cup from earlier, spilling its contents across the counter. Ethan quickly grabbed a towel, his reflexes kicking in. "Don't worry about it. Happens all the time." Her eyes widened, clearly mortified. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I swear I'm not usually this clumsy. It's just been one of those mornings." Ethan gave her a reassuring smile. "Trust me, we've all been there. Let me remake that for you." "What was it?" "A caramel latte," she said, visibly relaxing under his calm demeanor. "Thanks for being so nice about it. I think the universe is testing me today." "Sometimes curveballs lead to unexpected home runs," Ethan said with a wink as he started on her drink. She laughed, the sound light and genuine. "That's an optimistic take. I'll try to keep that in mind." As he handed her the steaming cup, their fingers brushed for a split second. She glanced at his name tag. "Thanks, Ethan. You've officially salvaged my morning." "Any time," he replied, watching as she gathered her things and headed for the door. Matt whistled low from his table. "Looks like someone just made an impression." Ethan ignored him, but his gaze lingered on the door long after she left. The next morning, Ethan was wiping down the counter when she walked in again. This time, she was juggling even more papers and looked even more frazzled. He couldn't help but smile as she approached. "Caramel latte," he guessed. She blinked in surprise. "You remembered?" "Of course," he said, already reaching for the caramel syrup. "Rough morning again?" "Rough week," she admitted, setting her papers down carefully this time. "I'm a kindergarten teacher, and let's just say 5-year-olds have a way of keeping you on your toes." "That sounds exhausting," Ethan said honestly. "It is," she replied with a small smile. "But it's also the most rewarding thing I've ever done. I mean, shaping young minds, helping kids learn and grow. There's nothing like it." Ethan paused, taken aback by the passion in her voice. Most people he knew talked about their jobs like they were a chore, but this woman, whoever she was, clearly loved what she did. "You're inspiring," he said before he could stop himself. She laughed, a little embarrassed. "I don't know about that. I'm just trying to make a difference, you know?" "I get it," Ethan said softly. And for the first time in a long while, he wasn't just saying something to be polite. He actually meant it. Later that evening, Ethan was recounting the interaction to Matt over a beer at his penthouse, one of the few luxuries he hadn't given up entirely. "So let me get this straight," Matt said, raising an eyebrow. "You're working as a barista to find a woman who doesn't care about your billions, and now you're interested in a kindergarten teacher who probably makes less in a year than you do in a day?" Ethan shrugged, ignoring his friend's teasing. "She's different, Matt. She doesn't care about appearances or wealth. She's real." Matt smirked. "And you're sure this isn't just another curveball from the universe?" Ethan rolled his eyes. "She's genuine, and that's exactly what I'm looking for." "All right, Romeo," Matt said, raising his beer in mock toast. Just don't forget. You're playing a dangerous game here. If she finds out who you really are and why you're pretending, things could get messy. I know, Ethan said, his expression turning serious. But I have to try. I need to know if this could be real. Over the next week, Lily, he'd finally learned her name, became a regular at the coffee shop. Every morning, she'd stop by for her caramel latte, and every morning, they'd chat a little longer. Ethan found himself looking forward to her visits more than he cared to admit. One morning, she mentioned her love for art, and Ethan's heart did an unexpected flip. He made a mental note to remember that detail, already thinking of ways to surprise her. As she left that day, Vanessa, her outspoken best friend, joined her outside the shop. Ethan watched through the window as the two women talked, Vanessa gesturing animatedly. Lily glanced back once, her cheeks turning pink when she caught Ethan's eye. Matt's words echoed in his mind. You're playing a dangerous game. But, as Ethan watched Lily walk away, he couldn't bring himself to care. For the first time in years, he felt something real. And he wasn't about to let it slip through his fingers. 2 weeks later, the crisp morning air carried the scent of freshly brewed coffee and the faint hum of city traffic outside the shop. Ethan was wiping down the espresso machine when Lily walked in, her smile brighter than usual, her tote bag swinging at her side. Today, she wasn't rushing or juggling papers. Instead, she was holding a plastic container filled with what looked like homemade cookies. Good morning, Ethan, she greeted, her voice warm. She placed the container on the counter, leaning in slightly. These are for you. A little thank you for always being so nice and remembering my order. Ethan blinked, momentarily caught off guard. You made these? Lily nodded, brushing, a lock of hair behind her ear. Yeah, I figured you probably deal with enough grumpy customers in the mornings. I thought you deserved a little kindness. Ethan felt a strange tightening in his chest. No one had ever made him cookies before, not without expecting something in return. He opened the lid, the rich smell of chocolate wafting up. These look amazing, he said softly. You should try one, she encouraged, her eyes lighting up. He pulled out a cookie and bit into it, the taste decadent and comforting. Okay, these are dangerous, he said with a grin. If you ever get tired of teaching, you've got a future as a baker, she laughed, shaking her head. I don't think I could handle the early mornings. Ethan chuckled, setting the cookie down to make her latte. Well, thank you. This is the nicest thing anyone's done for me in a long time. Lily tilted her head, her expression curious. Really? You come across as the kind of guy who's used to people being nice to him. Ethan hesitated, his hands stilling on the coffee machine. Not the way you are, he said finally, his voice low. This feels real. The words hung in the air between them for a moment before Lily smiled, her cheeks flushing slightly. Well, I'm glad. As Ethan handed her the latte, his nerves sparked with a sudden idea. Hey, Lily, he said, trying to sound casual. I was thinking of grabbing lunch from this new sandwich place around the corner later. Want to join me? Lily blinked in surprise, then smiled. Sure, I'd like that. I have a break around 1. Perfect, Ethan said, his heart inexplicably lighter as she waved and walked out the door. At exactly 1:05 p.m., Ethan waited outside the sandwich shop, his hands jammed in the pockets of his jacket. He spotted Lily approaching, her auburn hair catching the sunlight as she adjusted her scarf. She looked radiant, and for a moment Ethan forgot how to breathe. Sorry I'm late, she said, a little out of breath. One of my students had an art emergency, which, in kindergarten, means glitter everywhere. Ethan laughed, holding the door open for her. Sounds like a crisis. You have no idea, she said with a grin as they stepped inside. They ordered their sandwiches, and found a small table by the window. The conversation flowed easily, the hum of the busy lunch crowd fading into the background as they talked. Lily shared stories about her students, funny anecdotes about their endless curiosity and unfiltered honesty, and Ethan found himself hanging on every word. What about you? She asked, taking a bite of her sandwich. What made you want to work at a coffee shop? Ethan's pulse quickened. He'd anticipated this question but still felt unprepared. I guess I wanted a change, he said carefully. Something simpler. Something that felt more grounded. Lily studied him for a moment, her gaze thoughtful. You're not like most people I've met, she said finally. You're kind, but there's something else. Like you've seen the world from a different perspective. Ethan smiled faintly, deflecting. And what about you? Why teaching? Her face softened, her eyes brightening. Because it matters, she said simply. The world isn't always kind or fair, but if I can help my students grow up to be kind, confident, and curious, then maybe I've made it just a little better. Ethan stared at her, his chest tightening again. You're incredible, you. Know that? Lily laughed, brushing off the compliment. Hardly. I just love what I do. They finished their lunch, neither wanting the moment to end. As they walked back toward the coffee shop, Ethan spotted a street artist setting up a small easel on the corner. He remembered Lily mentioning her love of art and felt a spark of inspiration. Wait here for a second, he said, stepping over to the artist. After a brief exchange, he returned with a small, hand-painted postcard of a colorful cityscape. For you, he said, handing it to Lily. She looked at the postcard, then back at him, her eyes wide. Ethan, this is beautiful. You didn't have to do that. I wanted to, he said simply. I remembered you said you loved art. Lily smiled, her cheeks pink. Thank you. Really. Ethan shrugged, but inside his heart was racing. He could feel himself falling for her, and as much as it thrilled him, it also terrified him. How long could he keep up this charade? And what would happen when the truth inevitably came out? For now, though, he pushed those thoughts aside, focusing on the way Lily's smile lit up her face. He didn't know what the future held, but in this moment, he knew one thing. He wasn't ready to let her go. Another week passed, the chill of early winter settling over the city. Ethan found himself counting down the minutes to Lily's morning visits, his heart lifting every time she walked through the door. But today, when she stepped into the coffee shop, her usual bright smile was absent. Hey Lily, Ethan greeted, noticing the tension in her posture. Caramel latte, right? She nodded, her expression distracted as she set her tote bag down. Thanks, Ethan. As he worked on her drink, he stole a glance at her. You okay? You seem off. Lily hesitated, then let out a sigh. It's just been a rough few days. My car broke down yesterday, so I've been taking the bus. And one of my students, Sammy, he's been really struggling. His mom told me last night she can't afford the after-school art program he loves, and now she's thinking of pulling him out of it altogether. Ethan's chest tightened. He could hear the ache in her voice, the way she carried not only her own burdens but those of others too. That's tough, he said, placing her latte on the counter. You care a lot about your kids, don't you? They're my world, she said softly. I just wish I could do more for them. Ethan wanted to reach across the counter and take her hand, to tell her she was already doing more than enough. Instead, he offered her a small smile. If anyone can make a difference, it's you. Her lips curved into a faint smile. Thanks, Ethan. That means a lot. As she left, Ethan's mind raced. He couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said about the little boy who might lose the one thing that brought him joy. He knew he couldn't reveal the truth about who he was. Not yet. But maybe there was still something he could do. The following day, Ethan arrived at the coffee shop earlier than usual, his hands clutching a small envelope. He'd spent the night researching local art programs and had found the one Lily mentioned. After a quick call to confirm some details, he'd made an anonymous donation to cover Sammy's fees for the next year. When Lily walked in that morning, she looked a little more like herself, though the weight of her worries still lingered in her eyes. Ethan handed her the latte, his heart pounding as he slid the envelope across the counter toward her. What's this? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Open it, he said, trying to sound casual. Lily hesitated before peeling it open. Her eyes widened as she read the note inside. To Sammy's mom. A kind soul wanted to make sure Sammy could keep creating art. Consider this a gift from someone who believes in your son as much as you do. Her gaze snapped to Ethan, her expression a mix of shock and disbelief. Ethan, did you— He shook his head quickly, cutting her off. It wasn't me. Just someone who heard Sammy's story and wanted to help. Lily's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, she simply stared at him. Then, before he could react, she leaned across the counter and hugged him. Whoever it was, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you for telling them. You have no idea what this means to me. Ethan swallowed hard, his throat tight. You deserve it, Lily. So does Sammy. Later that evening, Ethan found himself pacing his penthouse, his thoughts consumed by Lily. He knew he was treading dangerous ground. Every time he did something like this, he risked exposing his true identity. But he couldn't stop himself. Lily's kindness, her passion, her unwavering belief in the good of others, it was like a magnet, pulling him closer and closer. I'm losing it, he muttered to himself. You're in love with her, Matt's voice came from the doorway. Ethan turned to see his best friend leaning against the wall, a knowing smirk on his face. Don't start, Ethan warned. I'm not starting anything, Matt said, holding up his hands. But come on, Ethan, you're pretending to be a broke barista, you're anonymously donating to kids' art programs, and you're pacing your multi-million-dollar penthouse like a lovesick teenager. If this isn't love, I don't know what is. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. What am I supposed to do, Matt? I can't tell her the truth. Not yet. And why not? Matt challenged. What are you so afraid of? Ethan hesitated, his chest tightening. That she'll walk away, that she'll think everything between us was a lie. Matt crossed the room, clapping a hand on Ethan's shoulder. She's not like the others, Ethan. You know that. And if she's really the one, she'll understand. Ethan nodded, though the weight of his doubts lingered. I just need more time. The next weekend, Ethan decided to surprise Lily with something special. He remembered her mentioning her love for art and how she hadn't been to a gallery in years. After making a few discreet phone calls, he secured 2 tickets to an exclusive exhibit at one of the city's most prestigious art museums. When Lily met him outside the museum that Saturday evening, her eyes lit up in awe. Ethan, how did you even get tickets to this? It's been sold out for weeks, he shrugged, playing it off. Guess I got lucky, she laughed, shaking her head. You're full of surprises, you know that? Ethan grinned, offering her his arm. Come on, let's go see some art. As they wandered through the gallery, Lily's face lit up with wonder. She stopped in front of a large abstract painting, her expression thoughtful. What do you think it means? Ethan asked, standing beside her. Lily tilted her head, studying the piece. I think it's about growth. About how even in chaos, beauty can emerge. Ethan looked at her, his heart swelling. I think you're right. They continued through the exhibit, their conversations flowing as easily as ever. By the time they reached the final room, Ethan's nerves were buzzing. He wanted to tell her how much she meant to him, how she'd changed his life in ways he couldn't even begin to explain. But before he could gather his courage, Lily turned to him, her eyes shining. Thank you, Ethan, for this, for everything. You've made me feel seen in a way I haven't in a long time. Ethan's breath caught. Lily, you— She stepped closer, her hand brushing against his. You're one of the best things that's ever happened to me. And then, before he could overthink it, he leaned in and kissed her. It was soft, tentative at first, but when she kissed him back, everything else faded away. In that moment, Ethan knew he was in too deep. But, for once, he didn't care. 2 months after their first meeting, the city buzzed with the energy of the holiday season. Lights twinkled in storefronts, and the faint sound of carolers drifted through the streets. Ethan had just finished his shift at the coffee shop and was locking up when Matt's car pulled up to the curb. Get in, Matt called through the open window, his voice uncharacteristically serious. Ethan hesitated before sliding into the passenger seat. What's going on? Matt didn't answer immediately, pulling into traffic. We need to talk, somewhere private. 10 minutes later, they arrived at Ethan's penthouse. The moment they stepped inside, Matt turned to face him, his expression grim. "You need to end this charade, Ethan, now." Ethan frowned, tension knotting in his chest. "What are you talking about?" "I ran into Lily today," Matt said, crossing his arms. "She was at that little bookstore on 5th, buying something for her students. She doesn't know who I am, but I know who she is. And let me tell you, it felt wrong. Like I was lying to her just by saying hello." Ethan's stomach sank. "Did you say anything to her? Anything about me?" "Of course not," Matt snapped. "But it's only a matter of time before she figures it out. What are you going to do when she finds out you're not Ethan Clark, the humble barista, but Ethan Caldwell, billionaire tech mogul? You think she's just going to forgive you for lying to her for months?" Ethan sank onto the couch, rubbing his temples. "I don't know, Matt. I don't know how to tell her without losing her." Matt sighed, sitting across from him. "You're in love with her. Anyone can see that. But if you keep this up, you'll only hurt her more. She deserves the truth, Ethan. You owe her that." Ethan stared at the floor, Matt's words hitting him like a freight train. He knew he was right. He'd known it for weeks. But the thought of Lily walking away, of losing the one person who saw him for who he truly was, terrified him. "I need to think," Ethan said finally, his voice hollow. Matt nodded, standing. "Don't take too long. The longer you wait, the harder it'll be to fix this." The truth came sooner than Ethan anticipated. A few days later, Lily was walking to meet Ethan at the coffee shop when she noticed a sleek black car parked outside. She frowned as she spotted a familiar figure, leaning against it. Matt. She recognized him from their brief encounter at the bookstore. But something about the scene felt off. Matt was dressed sharply, his demeanor far too polished for the casual vibe of the coffee shop. Curiosity got the better of her. As she approached, she overheard Matt on the phone. "Yeah, Caldwell's been holed up in meetings all morning. I'll let him know as soon as he's free." Lily froze, her mind racing. Caldwell. The name sounded familiar, but it wasn't until she pieced together the context that her heart dropped. Ethan Caldwell, the billionaire tech mogul. Her Ethan. She stepped back, her pulse pounding in her ears. Everything clicked. The expensive art exhibit tickets, the way he always seemed to know just the right thing to say, the subtle hints of a life he never fully explained. It had all been a lie. She turned and walked away, her chest tightening with each step. That evening, Ethan was in the middle of an elaborate plan to surprise Lily with dinner at her favorite Italian restaurant when his phone buzzed. It was a text from her. "We need to talk. Come to my place." His heart sank. He had a feeling he knew what this was about. When he arrived at her apartment, she was waiting for him at the door. Her expression was guarded, her arms crossed. "Lily," he began, but she held up a hand. "Don't," she said, her voice trembling. "I just need to know one thing. Is it true? Are you Ethan Caldwell?" He hesitated for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. She saw the answer in his eyes. "Oh my God," she whispered, stepping back. "You lied to me, this whole time." "Lily, please," Ethan said, his voice desperate. "I can explain." "Explain what?" she snapped, tears welling in her eyes. "That you pretended to be someone else so you could... What? Test me? See if I was good enough for the real you?" "It wasn't like that," he said quickly. "I never meant to hurt you. I just wanted to know if someone could love me for who I am, not for my money." "And you thought the best way to do that was to lie to me," she said, her voice breaking. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? I trusted you, Ethan. I let myself believe in you. I love you," he said, his voice raw. "Everything I've done, every choice I've made, it's because I love you." She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You don't lie to someone you love, Ethan. You don't manipulate them and make them feel like a fool." "Lily, please," he begged. "Give me a chance to make this right." But she was already closing the door. "Goodbye, Ethan." For days, Ethan was a wreck. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't think about anything but the look on Lily's face when she shut the door on him. He'd lost her, and it was his own fault. Matt found him in his penthouse, staring out the window at the city below. You look like hell, he said, handing Ethan a glass of whiskey. I deserve it, Ethan muttered. I broke her heart. So fix it, Matt said simply. Ethan turned to him, his expression hollow. How? She won't even talk to me. Then show her, Matt said. Show her how much she means to you. 2 days later, Lily was grading papers at her kitchen table when her phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. Get dressed. I'm picking you up in 20 minutes. What? Lily texted back, but Vanessa didn't reply. True to her word, Vanessa showed up 20 minutes later, dragging Lily out of the apartment despite her protests. You'll thank me later, Vanessa said cryptically. They pulled up outside a lush, rooftop garden, the space illuminated by strings of fairy lights and surrounded by hundreds of lilies, her favorite flower. In the center of it all stood Ethan, his hands clasped nervously in front of him. Lily froze, her breath catching. What is this? Ethan stepped forward, his eyes filled with hope and regret. It's an apology, a promise, a declaration. Lily, I know I hurt you, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But if you'll let me, I'll spend every day showing you that I'm the man you thought I was. The man who loves you more than anything. Tears filled her eyes as she looked around, overwhelmed by the gesture. Ethan, I'm not perfect, he said, his voice breaking. But I'm yours, if you'll have me. For a long moment, Lily said nothing. Then slowly, she stepped forward, her hand reaching for his. You hurt me, she said softly. But I love you too much to let you go. Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she might disappear. You won't regret this, he whispered.